Something I find interesting is that over time, we go through many versions of ourselves. And that means we go through change. But with that change, the one thing that doesn't really make sense is the feeling of regret. Because how can you regret something that you once wanted? You have to bear in mind that you're kind of a hypocrite if you feel shame for things that you once did. At the time, I'm pretty sure you were confident in whatever you were doing. I'm pretty sure you didn't care too much about whatever you were doing, or maybe you cared a great deal. But now, because we're looking at it from a third person point of view, now we're looking at ourselves when before it was in our point of view. Now we have some sort of problem with it. And I do understand the feeling of being embarrassed by your past. I do understand initially thinking, oh, I wish I wasn't doing any of that. But you have to remember that you are a completely different person now. I can't keep looking back at myself and having regrets on things I once did because I knew I weren't regretful when I was doing them. Something I don't really see being talked about often is how powerful your words can be when you are talking badly about your previous self. Now, I don't know about you, but not even too long ago, I had a bad habit of talking down about my previous self, about my younger self. I have already been through my journey of learning to accept him and knowing without him, I would not be here today. But I was still actively dissing him. I was still actively discussing my disliking with him. And sometimes we forget as people that just because we're talking about ourselves in a past tense, about somebody we once were, a shell of our former self, that we can still put down ourselves. And sometimes we underrate the feeling it has on us now. Even when you're talking about yourself in the past, subconsciously that's affecting yourself in the present. Because now you're putting all this baggage on you. You've already been through all of that stuff with your previous self. And I have finally learned to stop talking down on myself. Because even though now I am at least 4 people different from who I was back then, even though now I might not necessarily agree with some of the things I was doing, I have learned to not have any sort of regret. Because, as I always say, everything happens for a reason. Everything is a lesson. And if you are denying the lessons that life is bringing you, you're only going to see them as mistakes. You have to actively practice positive speech, especially when it comes to you. I remember growing up and I was even watching YouTubers like we all do. Sometimes I like to watch when they would watch their old videos. And sometimes the way they would talk about themselves, it wouldn't necessarily be disgusting, but they were kind of teasing their former self. Because obviously, it's kind of the same person. But I always used to think that was crazy. I always used to think, how could somebody do that, tease themselves like that? Like that was them and they were trying their hardest at the time and now it's something that's funny. Now, I'm not necessarily against that because there's nothing wrong with teasing yourself time to time or even laughing at yourself. But regret is a much stronger thing. And that's something I learned from when I grew up and I did more than tease myself. I was deleting old videos of myself. I was trying to erase old memories I had. I was ashamed of how I used to speak and the words that I used to use, even though back then it was fine and it was appropriate. I think that it's important to speak positively now because it's important to accept every single version of you. And that's how you make the current you stronger. You need to be able to embrace the previous things that you have done because it's bigger than you've grown up now and now that you can see that it's stupid. Because at the end of the day, that's a part of life. We all have done some goofy things, to say the least. We all have done stuff that we might not necessarily do now. But that doesn't make it wrong. That doesn't make our previous actions disgusting. And we shouldn't have any regret, because that's how it used to be back then. If anything, I view regret as being a privilege to those that think they are above their previous selves. How could you be in the type of position to judge who you once were? And I don't care how far you've come, because you don't understand the type of effect that has on you. Because even though you've heard me separate myself from my younger self, even though you've heard me say that we are much different, that's somebody I once was. That is somebody, if we are talking logically and realistically, that's me. How could I be above myself? Before I try to think I'm above anybody else, I'm above myself. To me, that doesn't make any sense, and that's why it's a privilege. Because I don't know who told you you're even in the position to be able to judge you, younger you. Because guess what? You used to be innocent. You used to be more confident. You used to not be afraid to put yourself out there. And you used to not take life too seriously. Those are all beautiful things to me. And I know I've done some real silly stuff in the past. Who hasn't? Who hasn't done anything silly? Who hasn't been a little goofy? Who hasn't made mistakes? Who hasn't done embarrassing things? Who hasn't had regret? Everyone goes through that, so you should not hold on to it. And that's the point. Holding on to regret is a massive weight I don't wish on anybody, because it's hard to shake it off. It's hard to drop that, because you know deep down that was something you thought was okay, and for some reason that's too hard for you to understand. But that's my point. Think about who you were before. Think about the type of mindset you were in. You were nowhere near regret. I could even argue you used to embrace things like that. And now look at you, thinking you're higher than yourself. I try to stay serious. I can't do it. But come on now. Come on, let's be honest. You're not above yourself. You just grew a little. The next time you are suffering from regret, I want you to tell yourself two things. I want you to tell yourself that you are not in a higher place to judge who you once were. You need to be asking yourself, who do I think I am? How can I say that now? Because I know, deep down, years later to come, I might be regretting what I'm doing right now. And for two, most importantly, I want you to tell yourself, how can I regret what I've previously done when that's what I wanted? Anyway, that's me for today. I'm going to catch you tomorrow as always. Griffin! End video. I won't be regretting that. You can't lie now. This is tough. This is tough. If I got this tatted on my chest in black ink, right? What are we saying? If I get the chest a little bit big,